and the town's only commercial interest, the tiny hotel and cafe owned by Pasquale's family, all huddled like a herd of sleeping goats in a crease in the sheer cliffs. Behind the village, the rocks rose 600 feet to a wall of black striated mountains. Below it, the sea settled in a rocky, shrimp-curled cove, from which the fishermen put in and out every day. Isolated by the cliffs behind and the sea in front, the village had never been accessible by car or cart, and so the streets, such as they were, consisted of a few narrow pathways between the houses, brick-lined roads skinnier than sidewalks, plunging alleys and rising staircases so narrow that unless one was standing in the Piazza San Pietro, the little town square, it was possible anywhere in the village to reach out and touch walls on either side. In this way, remote Porto Vergogna was not so different from the quaint cliffside towns of the Cinque Terre to the north, except that it was smaller, more remote, and not as picturesque. In fact, the hoteliers and restaurateurs to the north had their own pet name for the tiny village pinched into the vertical cliff seam, Culo di Baldraca, the whore's crack. Yet, despite his neighbor's disdain, Pasquale had come to believe, as his father had, that Porto Vergogna could someday flourish like the rest of the Levante, the coastline south of Genoa that included the Cinque Terre, or even the larger tourist cities in the Ponente, Portofino, and the sophisticated Italian Riviera. The rare foreign tourists who boated or hiked into Porto Vergogna tended to be lost French or Swiss. But Pasquale held out hope the 1960s would bring a flood of Americans, led by the bravissimo U.S. President John Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline. And yet, if his village had any chance of becoming the destinazione turistica primaria he dreamed of, Pasquale knew it would need to attract such vacationers, and to do that it would need, first of all, a beach. And so Pasquale stood half-submerged, holding a big rock beneath his chin as the red mahogany boat bobbed into his cove. His old friend Orencio was piloting it for the wealthy vintner and hotelier Gualfredo, who ran the tourism south of Genoa, but whose fancy 10-meter sport boat rarely came to Porto Vergogna. Pasquale watched the boat settle in its chop and could think of nothing to do but call out, "Orencio!" His friend was confused by the greeting. They had been friends since they were 12, but they were not yellers, he and Pasquale, more acknowledgers, lip-raisers, eyebrow-tippers. Orencio nodded back grimly. He was serious when he had tourists in his boat, especially Americans. "They are serious people, Americans," Orencio had explained to Pasquale once. "Even more suspicious than Germans. If you smile too much, Americans assume you're stealing from them." Today, Orencio was especially dour-faced, shooting a glance toward the woman in the back of his boat, her long tan coat pulled tight around her thin waist, her floppy hat covering most of her face. Then the woman said something quietly to Orencio, and it carried across the water. Gibberish, Pasquale thought at first, until he recognized it as English, American in fact. "Pardon me, what is that man doing?" Pasquale knew his friend was insecure about his limited English and tended to answer questions in that awful language as tersely as possible. Orencio glanced over at Pasquale, holding a big rock for the breakwater he was building, and attempted the English word for spiaggia, beach, saying with a hint of impatience, "Bitch." The woman cocked her head as if she hadn't heard right. Pasquale tried to help, muttering that the bitch was for the tourists, per I turisti, but the beautiful American didn't seem to hear. It was an inheritance from his father, Pasquale's dream of tourism. Carlo Tursi had spent the last decade of his life trying to get the 5 larger villages of the Cinque Terre to accept Porto Vergogna as the 6th in the string. "How much nicer," he used to say. "Say, Terre, the 6 lands." Cinque Terre is so hard on tourist tongues. But tiny Porto Vergogna lacked the charm and political pull of its 5 larger neighbors. So while the 5 were